Major changes have hit the Florida real estate contract, and they just went into effect on November 1st. I am not an attorney, but I did consult with a really great one to go over some of the changes that are going to affect you as buyers and sellers from here on out. The Florida real estate contract has had some major facelifts, and everything just went into effect November 1st. I want to dive in today and tell you what's most important. Lindsey Johnson is not an attorney, but a realtor with Keller Williams Gainesville Realty Partners. Please consult with your professionals for legal advice. Today, I'm not going to go through every single change, so you definitely want to make sure that you're consulting your attorneys. But one of the changes on page 1 has to do with the personal property that is now required to convey with a house when it sells. This can be found in item D under the personal property section on the as-is residential contract. In addition to the items that we've seen for years, like refrigerators, dishwashers, they've also added thermostats, doorbells, television wall mounts and television mounting hardware, mailbox keys, and storm protection items and hardware. These items are new because they've come up a lot in recent transactions, so make sure you're crystal clear on what exactly it is that you want to leave for buyers when you're selling a house, and when you're buying a house, you better get crystal clear on what's going to be there on closing day. And for things such as thermostats and doorbells, keep in mind that could mean your Nest or your Ring. And the mailbox keys for a homeowner who's selling their own property may not be as big of a deal, but I do see this as potentially becoming an issue for investors. If your tenant doesn't turn the mailbox keys back in, you better make sure you have another set. I'm not an attorney, clearly. If I was, that would have been smoother. Page 2. Another important thing to note is going to be in section 5, which is the extension of the closing date. Some of the language has changed in here, and here's how it reads. In the event closing funds from buyer's lender are not available on closing date due to Consumer Financial Protection Bureau closing disclosure, say that 10 times fast, or CFPB requirements, if paragraph 8B is checked, which is for financing, loan approval has been obtained and lender's underwriting is complete, then closing date shall be extended for such period necessary to satisfy CFPB requirements, provided such period shall not exceed 7 days. It used to be 10, and adding in the CFPB language does sort of change what will allow an automatic extension to happen. So make sure you are in very close contact with your realtor and attorneys so that all your deadlines are met. And have I mentioned? Not an attorney. A realtor though, a realtor for Keller Williams Gainesville Realty Partners, not a lawyer. This is the big one. Paragraph 8, the financing paragraph. The first change that they've made is in item A, which is basically striking through a lot of the jargon they were using for cash transactions. Now it just reads as, this is a cash transaction with no financing contingency. Pretty straightforward. What our attorney did bring up was the fact that if you're trying to win in multiple offers by checking this box and hoping to just switch to a loan, there's no financing contingency, so be really careful and consult your professionals on that. And 8B, this I think is one of the most important changes in my humble opinion. Not an attorney, but a realtor, because I think this is going to affect our day-to-day work and how we run transactions. And I personally think this is one of the biggest changes. And I'm going to do my best to try to relay the information I've been given without overly interpreting the contract because, again, not a lawyer, never took the bar, consult your attorneys. But the language that we're seeing here has a lot to do with the financing contingency period and the appraisal contingencies. Two big things that have become very important in the competitive market of today. So in item B, the way that it reads is, this contract is contingent upon within, and there's a blank. If you don't put anything, it says if left blank, then 30 days after effective date. Meaning your loan approval period defaults to 30 days unless you otherwise write something in that's less or more, and that's the amount of time with which you have to get all this stuff done to get your loan approved and to close. And where it gets real juicy is on page 3. Excited? You should be. So line 109. And 2, buyer's mortgage broker or lender having received an appraisal or alternative valuation of the property satisfactory to lender. if either is required by lender, which is sufficient to meet the terms required for lender to provide financing for buyer and proceed to closing. Appraisal. Doesn't sound super scary, shouldn't be super scary, but what our attorney was telling us is the appraisal or alternative valuation of the property satisfactory to the lender. That's some kind of vague language. That doesn't say that it has to be at the contract price. It's got to be satisfactory to the lender. So it's another great question to ask your real estate attorney. If the appraisal comes in low and we don't have an appraisal contingency, what does that mean? Because I think it might mean that you better put that appraisal contingency on there or you're going to pony up some extra cash or lose your deposit. And continuing on page 3, still under item 8, the financing paragraph, I want to jump down to line 152 and really hammer home what the language is between line 155 and 157. Starting at line 152, it reads, if buyer has timely provided either written notice provided for in paragraph 8B3 above, and buyer thereafter fails to close this contract, the deposit shall be paid to the seller unless failure to close is due to seller's default or inability to satisfy other contingencies of this contract or property-related conditions of the loan approval. This is what I want to highlight, specifically excluding the appraisal valuation. Excluding. That's big. And when my office here at Keller Williams was meeting with the attorney, I probably asked 5 questions on this page alone because the appraisal contingency has been a huge sticking point for how to be competitive as a buyer in multiple offers and how to protect your deposit. So this language here is going to change the game. You've got to either be ready to pony up the cash if it comes in low or have the appraisal contingency box checked. In fact, when I further clarified, probably much to the annoyance of everybody in the room, and I said, so gone are the days of being able to submit a buyer offer without the appraisal contingency box checked, relying on this language to protect your buyer's deposit if appraisal comes in low? He said yes. And as I said before, there's a lot of changes, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I am going to hit some of the highlights. So I am jumping all the way to standard O. And this, in today's world, I think is going to be a major pivot in communication. And this talks about notices. For example, if at midnight your inspection period expires and you are canceling the contract, the notice must be in writing and may only be made by mail, facsimile transmission, personal delivery, or email. Text messages don't count as notification in writing. And this is when I think it's gonna burn some realtors because we love to text. It is quick, it is efficient, and it can be done quickly. But don't send any kind of notification via text because it's not gonna count. And in the home stretch here, jumping to the item 19, the addenda. The addenda are defined as additional terms that are included or attached and incorporated into the contract. Some of the addenda have changed, and in fact, they've even added one for seasonal and vacation rentals. So if you're selling an Airbnb or VRBO, we've got a rider for that now. There's also been some additional riders added for mold and disclosures for PACE. If you're not familiar with PACE, I won't go too deeply into it today, but essentially it's a way for homeowners to get certain upgrades, but there's a lien that's put on the house until you pay that off. The lien supersedes the mortgage, so that can get kind of sticky at closing. If you've just gotten brand new solar from PACE, you better make sure you check into that. November 1st brought some major changes to the Florida real estate contract, so make sure as buyers and sellers, you're paying attention. Make sure you know what those changes are because they're going to affect your transactions in buying and selling property. Consult good legal advice from an actual attorney because I'm not one. But I do love making sure that you know what's happening in today's world. And speaking of current events, don't miss my video on the new renter permits that are required for the city of Gainesville. If you're an investor, you can't miss this one. I'm Lindsey Johnson, your resource for all things real estate. See you next time.